All right, we'll stay with the Super Bowl here for a couple of minutes, but we'll chat some college hoops as well during our Handicapping the Hardwood segment with Kyle Hunter of HunterSportsPicks.com and also BangTheBook.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
It's going all right. How about yourself, Adam?
Doing very well, man. Appreciate the time as always, bud. Let's touch on the Super Bowl line and total here. We'll do props later on in the week when we get you back on the show for our second segment of the week, but just in terms of looking at New England minus 2.5, total of 56, not much movement on the side so far. Once we get to 3, we know exactly what's going to happen. So what are your thoughts on side and total right now for the big game?
Well, I mean, we've got 79% of the bets so far on the Patriots, 83% of the money on the Patriots. I don't think it surprises me too much that the Patriots are getting that kind of action. The Rams haven't been that impressive when you really look at what they've done for the last, couple months of the season. At the beginning of the year, they looked very good. I heard the end of your talk with Joe Everett, and I agree with what both of you guys said there. The big question here is Jared Goff. Is he going to play well enough for the Rams to be able to win this game? And I don't really know what the answer is there. I will say that I don't think the Patriots are a perfect team. I mean, not that there's ever really a perfect team, but this is a Patriots team that's not quite as good as some of the teams they've been in the past. But, they have that chip on their shoulder now. And, they thought that everybody was kind of discounting them too quickly, and they're really well coached. They have some great leadership. That's hard to go against. Having said that, if you look at the total's dropped a little bit. You go from 58.5 down to 56.5. Pinnacle even has a 56 now. It's 50-50 on the bets here. About 60% of the money's on the under. I can't say that I have any real strong leans in this game, to be honest with you. It's one of those games where if I play this game as a premium, it's going to be a small play for me. Either that or I'll be passing and just taking some Super Bowl props, which I look to dig into here in the next few days.
All right, we'll do that on our Friday segment here, which I don't know if we'll record that Thursday or if we'll do it Friday morning, but I know that we'll talk props later on in the week with Kyle, who has had a very, very strong NFL season this year. So hopefully you can finish on a high note with those props and, if you make a small play on side or total, hopefully with that as well. All right, let's get into college basketball because that's what our Handicapping the Hardwood segment is for. We go conference by conference here over the last couple of weeks, and today we're going to take a look at the Summit League, one of the smaller conferences out there. There's only 9 teams in this league, so it won't take us too long to get through it, but a very interesting conference for a variety of different reasons.
Yeah, in the Summit League, as I talk about numbers for the Summit League, keep in mind that this league hasn't even been lined as long as most of the other ones. So when I talk about them, I'm going to be quoting since 2010 instead of since 2005. So Summit League hasn't been lined as long. It's a very small league. As you said, one thing to keep in mind about this league, there's a lot of teams in this league that don't play much defense. It's kind of, I would say this is similar to a Big Sky, something like that, another really small conference to where most teams are trying to get up and down, a lot of fast-paced games. You get a couple teams in this league who try to slow the game down, a North Dakota State, sometimes Oral Roberts, teams like that. But all in all, most of the teams are going to play pretty quickly here, and most of them aren't going to play much defense. So keep that in mind as you look forward. I'll say that the underdog is 337 and 334 ATS in Summit League play since 2010. So really, no strong trend to give you on dogs or favorites there. And the stronger trend is on the road teams. We've tried to isolate some of the conferences in the past where, home teams are probably getting a little bit too much credit because overall, I assume people who have listened to Bang the Book Radio for very long at all have heard us say this, but I think it's worth repeating that home court advantage, home field advantage in college football, home court advantage in college basketball is in general a little bit overvalued. And in some conferences more so than others, and the Summit League is one of them, road teams are 355 and 315 ATS since 2010. If you want to filter this down a little bit, road teams with a 1 or 2 game ATS losing streak are cashing at 57.7% in Summit League play since 2010. So teams who are kind of on a bit of a losing streak when it comes to against the spread have done really well here in the Summit League. So, nothing to note as far as favorite and dog, but the road teams have been good.
Well, and something that's so interesting about these really small conferences, I mean, we're talking about venues for some of these schools, 1,500 seats, 2,000 seats, 2,500 seats. Sometimes you get a team that's got a pretty big venue that they play in. That can create a home court advantage with a shooting backdrop. But, these are very, very small, kind of packed-in gymnasiums. And also, the schools here in this conference, they're not even filling those tiny little barns. So, home court advantage does appear to be overrated in this league for sure.
Yeah, I mean, there's some pretty big differences as far as how big the gyms are. Oral Roberts has a pretty big gym, I remember. Yeah, it's over 10,000 seats there. So, I mean, you have some where they're very small, and then you have some that are much bigger than others. Summit League is not going to be a league that's going to be, packed houses consistently. I feel like these are a lot of programs that are flying under the radar partially because they don't have that big of a fan base. This is an area where, a North Dakota State, a team like that they're a football school. So I know they're not D1, but everybody knows they're very good. A lot of the teams in this league are not really going to get a huge backing, but, that's part of what makes them more under the radar and makes them have more value. And we've done good isolating conferences like this in the past, and we'll try to keep doing this. I wanted to say a stronger trend here. The over is 363 and 309 since 2010 in all games, so 54%, which that's pretty solid. I mean, you consider a big sample size, and you consider not even filtering it down. 54% to the over is pretty good. Since the start of the 2016-2017 season, with a total of 153 or lower, overs are 161, 62.1%. Now, most notable here is North Dakota State is 31-12 to the over in that case. I found that really interesting because, like I said, most teams in this league are playing really quickly. North Dakota State usually tries to slow the game down. If you look at how they're playing this year, that's the same thing. I mean, they're slowing things down quite a bit again this year, but they have a weak defense. They're pretty efficient on offense. So they're not really successful in getting the game into a low-scoring game, and that's been proven with a 31-12 to the over. I think that's certainly something to remember going forward is that in the Summit League, if you find too low of a number, you have to lean to the over because usually both teams are going to be pretty bad in that game. And, more times than not, well, at least one of the teams are going to be pushing the pace. So overs have done very well in this league.
Is this a league where there's a lot of fouling? I mean, does that help too? Because, you've got this is a conference where, I don't know if they're going to let them play. I mean, you talk about the ACC or the SEC or the Big Ten, something like that. The referees may be a little bit more prone to let the guys play because we're talking best of the best talent levels. In this conference, not to say that nobody's talented, but it's a different kind of game. So, is this maybe a little bit more physical of a league to the point where, there's, a higher free throw rate?
Yeah, it looks to me like, because I'm looking down through them right now, it looks like they're pretty average on the fouling rate. I do see that most of these teams are good at free throws, so if you put them on the line, they're pretty efficient at taking care of those free throws. I will say, and I don't mean to take this too far off track, but when we talk about something like this, I like to try to give any kind of little nugget that I can. I will say that the American Athletic Conference so far this year, if you look at the fouling rates in that conference and you watch any of the games in the AAC, they are calling everything a foul. I mean, it's really ridiculous. I truly believe that the AAC has been so low scoring the last couple of years that they want there to be a lot of more points. So what's the best way to get more points? If you don't have very efficient offenses, just call a foul on everything. So that's something that I've noticed that I would certainly want people to remember, that the AAC is just foul right now, and that's dangerous to take a low under because of that. But as far as the Summit League, it looks like they're pretty average as far as that. They're good shooting teams. They shoot free throws well. a lot of these teams shoot three-pointers very well as well, and they take a lot of threes. So I think that would be the biggest reason.
All right, so as we look at the hierarchy here in the Summit League, the small conferences that we've talked about so far, the Sun Belt, clear leader in Georgia State, the Big Sky, clear leader in Montana, the Big West, clear leader in UC Irvine. We've got the same thing here in the Summit League with South Dakota State.
Yeah, South Dakota State, much better than anybody else in this league. I mean, certainly they can get upset at any point. They already did lose to Fort Wayne, 104-88, in a really high-scoring game there. Fort Wayne's the second-best team here, but there's a pretty big drop in class from South Dakota State. Look, everybody knows about Mike Dahm. He's very, very good. Stretch guy. He can get out pointer. He can also play inside the arc. But Jenkins is underrated by most people. This is a team that can score in huge bunches. They are so good. They shoot 42.3% from three-point range, almost 75% from the line. I think the question mark is who you think the second-best team in this league is. And I'm going to go with Nebraska, Omaha. Just elite on offense, just about as good as South Dakota State on offense. Just very weak on defense. And so far this year in Summit League play, Nebraska, Omaha has actually been a little bit more efficient than has South Dakota State. I'm not sure it'll finish that way. I would guess that South Dakota State would probably end up having the best offense as well. But Omaha's problem is they just don't play any defense. You can see some really, really high-scoring games in their games. So if they're playing anybody that tries to slow the game down and have a relatively low tempo, relatively low total, I would certainly look to play overs with Omaha. Now, in general, though, you're going to have some really high numbers, so be careful with that. I would say Fort Wayne, the third-best team, they're inconsistent. They're one of those teams that, to me, they look like they should be the second-best team in this league, but then they go and lose to South Dakota on the road, Western Illinois on the road, and then Nebraska, Omaha at home 3 games in a row. I still think they have the second-most potential in this league. So, if we're looking forward to the conference tournament in the Summit League, I think the second favorites would probably be Fort Wayne. But right now they've been pretty inconsistent. South Dakota I would put next. When Trey Birch Manning is playing, which he is again now, it's a pretty good team. They're better at defense than most teams in this league. And I think that's important in that, most teams in this league don't play any defense. So South Dakota looks quite a bit different than most of those teams. South Dakota State's first in defensive efficiency in this conference so far this year. Number 2 is South Dakota. So they have a new coach this year. Craig Smith did a really good job with them last year, going 26-9. It's important to note that Matt Mooney was probably their best player last year. He transferred. He now plays for Texas Tech. So they don't have the same upside that they had last year, but South Dakota's still a pretty good team. Then I would go North Dakota State. I've already talked about them. They try to slow it down, but they're not very good at defense. North Dakota next, and this is North Dakota's first year in the league, so some unknown as to how they will do in kind of odd spots. I will say that they surprised me quite a bit when they went to Denver and just blew out Denver in their first game there. That might say more about Denver than it does about North Dakota, to be honest with you. Denver's been really weak this year, but first year in the Summit League, they've lost 3 straight games. They have some potential. They're not a terrible team, but they're not very good either. Western Illinois, I think this is one of the hardest teams to figure out in this league. I've followed the Summit League pretty closely for many years now, and I know Western Illinois always pulls some rare, really strange upset, and then they just get beat up on many times outside those games. So Western Illinois is a team that I usually try to stay away from their games. Oral Roberts used to be a good team. They're not very good anymore. They were coached by Sutton for a good while. This is a team now. Paul Mills is their coach. They've won 4 games in the Summit League. Maybe they're a little bit better than I'm giving them credit for being, but, they've only won 1 on the road. They play quite a few road games the rest of the way. I'm not very high on Oral Roberts. And then Denver. Denver has been extremely disappointing. If you look at Denver, they do have a great home court advantage, and they should be knocking off big-name teams at home. And instead, they've lost some games that they never should have lost at home. I thought this program would be doing better now with Rodney Billups at the head. 7-15 this year. They have more potential than they've shown. I kind of wonder if there's some chemistry issues or something going on there at Denver.
The thing for Denver that's weird, I'm kind of looking at their profile here. They are the worst three-point percentage defense in the country. They're 30th in shooting them, but they're only 259th in three-point percentage rate. So, I don't get it. I feel like if you have something that you do well on offense and you can't defend anybody, maybe do that thing on offense that you do well even more. Why not shoot more threes? I don't get it.
Yeah, it's confusing. I would say that if you look at their profile, there's a lot of things that are confusing. They're just a team that seems like they should be better than they are. They turn the ball over a lot on offense, and if you're not really taking advantage that you're a good shooting team, and they are a good shooting team. Like you said, they shoot threes really well. They shoot free throws really well. Generally, if you see a team that shoots threes really well and shoots free throws well, they have a lot of good shooters. They're not really taking advantage of the fact that they have a lot of good shooters. Partially, they're not taking as many threes as they should, and they're turning it over so many times that they don't even get a shot. So definitely been a tough year for Denver.
All right, so what about some situational spot types of things here? This is a conference that is a little bit spread out. You're not talking about really big athletic budgets here again, so probably, some bus trips and things of that sort. Any scheduling spots that you like to take advantage of here?
Well, Denver should be a really hard spot when you're at the end of a road trip. Like I said, they've blown it in some of those spots this year. North Dakota, you look at the spot they were in on January 5th. They had just played at Oral Roberts. They were playing at Denver for the first time at altitude there. They went 80-59. I know Denver was favored there, probably just by a few points, but they lose 80-59. Really strange. Hard to know what to do with Denver now, because I will tell you, the college basketball situational spots article that I'll be putting together here this afternoon for BangTheBook.com. Denver's going to be in another good spot coming up this weekend. Denver has, 8 days between games, and then they play host to South Dakota State. South Dakota State goes to Oral Roberts and then goes to Denver. It's a bad spot, but it's a hard one to pull the trigger on. So, are you going to be able to pull the trigger on Denver plus, 12 or whatever they're going to be? It'll be a hard one to pull the trigger on, but it is a bad spot for South Dakota State. I think that South Dakota and South Dakota State back-to-back is a tough spot, because South Dakota State's the big dog in this league. I think South Dakota can catch some teams in bad spots thanks to that. Whether it be you're playing South Dakota right before you play South Dakota State, or you just put a huge effort in against South Dakota State, and now you have to play South Dakota, who's also a pretty good team. I think that could be a tricky spot. And I have to say, at Fort Wayne is a long trip for a lot of these teams. So I'd be careful backing teams after going to Fort Wayne, Western Illinois, a place like that. That's a long ways away from North Dakota State. So quick turnarounds here. We usually see Thursday, Saturday games. So be careful of that long travel and then quick turnarounds.
Well, we'll definitely take a look at another conference here later in the week. Maybe, I don't know, maybe we do the SoCon, or maybe we do the West Coast Conference, something like that. We'll figure one out here for later on in the week. But let's get to our regression candidates here, and we'll start with a positive regression team from the Ivy League.
Yeah, and we rarely talk about the Ivy League on here, and it's partially because, I'm open about the fact that the Ivy League has probably been my single worst league as far as betting over the years. It's done well in college basketball. The Ivy League is very unpredictable to me. I will say I think Harvard's defense is going to improve. Tommy Amaker's teams are known for strong defense. They were number 40 and number 75 in effective field goal percentage defense the last 2 years. They're 205th so far this year. But when you look at it, they've played the 30th toughest slate of offenses. They're going to play a lot of offenses that aren't very good in the Ivy League. They haven't even started out well in the Ivy League on defense either, but I think that will improve. So the biggest way I'd look to play this is if you're going to try to get involved in Harvard games, I'd probably look to take the under. I think that Harvard will continue to slow the game down, and I think that opposing offenses will not continue to shoot as well as they have against them.
Harvard's got a big one coming up on Friday. They play Yale, and then they'll play Brown on Saturday. Of course, keep in mind the Ivy, with the heavy course workload, they play Friday, Saturday back-to-backs in conference play. But that should be a good one there on Friday night.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, Harvard's going to have to play better than they've been playing because Yale's a pretty solid team. Yale's been consistent on both sides of the floor, so we'll see if Harvard can pick up their level of play. I'll say the negative regression candidate now, UNLV on offense. UNLV has faced the 314th ranked slate of defenses so far. I was looking at their schedule last night as I was making some of these notes. Look at who they play coming up. They play Nevada, Utah State, Boise State, Fresno in their next 4. First of all, those are tough games coming up. I think UNLV being 5-2 in the conference is a little misleading. I think that's going to change here pretty quickly. They play Nevada at home. That's always a big rivalry game. Everybody knows that. Utah State's very good. Going to Utah State's a very tough game. I'd be really surprised if UNLV plays well on offense or even is very close in that game. Boise State's certainly a game that they have a chance, but Boise State on defense is pretty solid. And then Fresno State at home. Fresno State, really good coaching job there by first-year coach Justin Hudson, 14-5 so far this year. They're 40th best in the nation in defensive efficiency. So UNLV shooting 42% from three-point range in conference play. That's not going to continue. I think that UNLV is probably a subpar, at least mediocre or a little bit worse three-point shooting team, and I expect their offensive efficiency to drop off pretty badly.
When you look at UNLV here, too, and they're second in the country in offensive rebounding percentage at 39.9%, but they were 43.3% in the non-conference. They've gone down to 34.2% in conference play. So while they're number 1 in the Mountain West in offensive rebounding, it's gradually going down for them. And as we know, easy putbacks, layups at the rim, dunks, stuff like that can help your offensive efficiency quite a bit. Certainly for UNLV, if they face some teams that rebound a little bit better, that'll hurt their offensive efficiency as well.
Yeah, I mean, the next game is Nevada. Nevada is a very good defensive rebounding team. The game after that, Utah State, they're number 1 in the country in defensive rebounding percentage. So I don't think they're going to be able to rely on second chance opportunities in their games in the near future either.
Well, there you go. So it looks like UNLV, couple tough games coming up. And, I know that we got some positive feedback about some spots and some games that we talked about over the weekend. So, circle these spots, write them down as you're listening. If you're listening in the car, maybe go back through or ask us for clarification on Twitter at Skating Tripods or at Kyle Hunter Picks. So, you can take advantage of these spots and matchups that we're talking about. Follow and fade. We spent a lot of time talking about Conference USA last weekend, and that certainly paid off.
Yeah, I did. I got quite a bit of feedback about that here in the last couple of days, which certainly it's encouraging for us to get the feedback about people enjoying hearing the information here on Handicapping the Hardwood on BangTheBook Radio. I think that, we always try to find these under-the-radar things that not everybody's talking about. And Conference USA is small enough that, just by listening to, ESPN radio or something really big, you're not going to hear about the spots in Conference USA. And I will say the schedule here has just been crazy. I mean, Conference USA trying to do something different with scheduling this year. It's put the condensed schedule in a big way. And I will say here, I think that Louisiana Tech's a good fade. Look at what Louisiana Tech just did this past weekend. Louisiana Tech just beat Marshall in overtime 89-80, and then beat Western Kentucky 62-50. Both Marshall and Western Kentucky were in those really tough spots where they played 4 games, technically, I guess, in the span of like 8 days, 5 games in 10 days. Brutal, really, really tough. La Tech was in better situational spot, so they catch them at a really bad time, and they beat both of those quality teams. Now they go to Florida. They play Florida Atlantic, they play FIU, then they play Southern Miss. I don't think La Tech's as good as they look like they are here in these last couple games. I think they benefited from that schedule being very positive for them. I really think that they could be a good fade here in these next 3 games. And if the price is right, These are some games that I'll be looking at for potential premium plays.
All right, so we don't want to talk all small conferences here, even though obviously there's a lot of value in those mid and low majors. The follow team actually comes from one of the biggest and maybe the best conference in college basketball this year.
Yeah, Penn State. So Penn State's 0-9 in the Big Ten. And I think the biggest reason Penn State's going to have value here going forward is they just lost at home to Rutgers. And everybody hears, oh, man, Penn State just lost to Rutgers at home. First of all, Rutgers is certainly better than they've been in the past. There's no doubt about that. And Penn State has had a lot of close losses this year. If you look at their schedule, they lost by 1 to Minnesota, who's a pretty solid team. They lost by 6 at Nebraska. They lost by 9 at Alabama, not a bad team either. They lost by 2 to Indiana at home. Lost in overtime to DePaul. A lot of very close losses. Lost by 7 to Maryland. So this is not a team that's losing by 15 or 20 points every game. They're just consistently finding a way to lose. I think that Penn State also is a team that I would look to find value on, partially because they've played such a tough schedule. Their 6th toughest schedule in the country, according to Ken Pom. Look who they play coming up. I mean, they're going to be catching quite a few points in a decent amount of games here. They play Purdue at home. Purdue in a little bit of a tricky spot there after they beat Michigan State. I know we got some feedback also on Purdue-Michigan State game that, kind of looking to the Purdue side and also the under, and that ended up working out there. Purdue with a huge win. Purdue is much better than they looked earlier this year, and I know that they were a team that we talked about following, and it's worked out pretty well. I think that Penn State is not a really good team. I'm not trying to tell everybody that I think that Penn State's a great team. They're going to get this big winning streak. I really just think that Penn State will likely be undervalued because they've been so bad. I think that, when you lose at home to Rutgers and you've lost every game in the Big Ten, at some point, the public starts saying, okay, that's free money against Penn State. Here we go. And then you get, plus 11 or plus 12 when you should have gotten plus 8. And those 3 or 4 points make a big difference.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some equity there in Penn State. And also, too, as bad as this team is, they're 32nd, according to Bart Torvik, in adjusted defensive efficiency. The problem is they can't score. So, if they get a team that kind of gives a half-assed defensive effort, and that can happen with some situational spots here in the Big Ten, that could create a spot where Penn State, is able to keep it close because of their defense.
Absolutely. Penn State, if you're playing that good a defense and you're getting a lot of points, you don't even always have to be that good on offense to be covering the number. And you would think that they'll shoot it better than they have so far, at least in some of their games coming up. So I think there could be some good value.
All right, let's talk about some game breakdowns here, and we will go way, way, way under the radar here for this first one. I know this is a team that and this is actually a conference that you've had a little bit of success in this year, the Atlantic Sun, which traditionally isn't even lined until conference tournament time. This year it has been, and Liberty and Lipscomb meet here on Tuesday night in a matchup of the two best teams in this division.
Yeah, I think this is a really good game. You look at Lipscomb. This is the team that beat SMU on the road. They beat TCU on the road, which looks like a very good win now. They beat Vermont by 25 points at home. Vermont's certainly a good team. They only lost by 4 one time to Belmont, by 2 to Belmont the other time, and then lost by 4 at Louisville. Liberty is a different team than Lipscomb by quite a bit. Lipscomb is pushing the pace. They're 9th in tempo in the country. Liberty, if you look at tempo, 351st. So very, very slow. Only a couple teams slower than them. Liberty is very efficient on offense, though. This is a team that shoots 39% from three-point range over the course of the season, 57% from two-point range, and 77.1% from the free throw line. Very, very good offense here for Liberty. Liberty on defense, 67th in defensive efficiency in the country, so pretty solid. Lipscomb is 19th in defensive efficiency. Lipscomb's 115th in offensive efficiency, according to Ken Pom. Lipscomb has played the 221st toughest schedule so far this year. Liberty 329. So that's Lipscomb's biggest advantage here, is that they have played a tougher schedule. Having said that, this is just such a pace war, and the two teams doing opposite things. It's kind of interesting, too, because usually the fast-paced team is the more offensive-minded team, the team that wants to have a really high-scoring game. Lipscomb, though, is better at defense than is Liberty. And then the slower-paced team that usually wants a low-scoring game, which Liberty does have a lot of low-scoring games. And I've had some success taking unders with Liberty this year just because Liberty is so good at taking their foot off the gas when they've got a big lead that you can get some pretty low-scoring games. But Liberty's so efficient on offense. Are they going to be able to shoot that well against Lipscomb? Liberty's going to be favored here. They're at home, probably be favored by 3.5, 4 points, somewhere in that range. I think this is a fascinating game. I would lean to the under if I had to play something in this game. But, Lipscomb has been very good at pushing the pace here. I think the biggest test here is can Liberty get their preferred pace of play? If you look at what Ken Palm is projecting here, Ken Palm's projecting 69 possessions. Lipscomb hasn't had a game that slow this year. So thinking that Liberty will be able to slow them down more than any other team, I can't blame them. I think that, there's a good chance it's slower than most of their games. But some of their games lately have been really, really fast. 77 possessions, 82 possessions, 76 possessions. I think more than anything else, I wanted to get talked Atlantic Sun, partially because, in the past the Atlantic Sun hasn't been lined. Didn't make as much sense to talk about it, but now we've got two high-quality teams here in the A-Sun.
Well, and I'm kind of wondering, you would think that this is what the A-Sun Conference tournament comes down to, Liberty and Lipscomb. So, we may be looking at, a 14 or a 15 that could give somebody a problem in the NCAA tournament. Yeah,
if you're a big-name team, I don't think these are the type of teams that you'd want to play in that first game. Not to say that, that we're thinking that they would pull the upset. They're certainly capable of it. And I think there's a big drop-off in the A-Sun from these two teams. I think these two teams are right up there with each other. And then after that, it's hard to even figure out who's next. Maybe North Florida would be after that. But it's a big drop-off after these two teams. So let's find out and let's see how this goes. And then they play again in just a couple of weeks at Lipscomb. So should be a couple good games between these two teams.
Yeah, that rematch coming up February 13th. And again, it's kind of cool to look at a conference that's not normally lined like this. And we've talked about this before. The A-Sun, the Southland, MEAC, SWAC, all that type of thing. It's an efficient market in the sense that the only people playing into it are the sharpest of the sharp that, are able to follow those conferences. But, the odds makers have probably had a little bit of a learning curve in those conferences. And you sort of wonder here, with a Lipscomb team that has some bigger named games under its belt against a Liberty team that doesn't, but is maybe the more efficient of the two teams, you sort of wonder how that line sets up.
Yeah, you do. And I think that the other thing about this to note is that in a conference like this, one thing that I've noticed is the lines move a lot more. And I think that goes to speak about what Adam just said there, is that the odds makers are likely not as sure about the numbers that they put out in these conferences because they haven't usually lined these games. So, you can easily see a 135 as far as the total get bet down to 130, or a 130 get bet up to 136 or 7 or something like that. As it is the case in most conferences this year, I would say that most of these are taking over money and are getting bet up. But there's been big moves in these games. I'm very curious to see what the line is here, both from a side and total standpoint. And I likely won't bet the game, but I think it's something that I'm going to try to use to learn about both of these teams since they're finally, kind of meeting their match in the conference.
Well, we don't have a lot of games on Tuesday, but it's a strong Tuesday night slate. That game's a good one. Virginia and NC State could be decent. Kansas and Texas, Mississippi State and Alabama, and another game that you want to talk about here between Wisconsin and Nebraska. Big-time battle in Lincoln.
Yeah, last night I was thinking about which one do I want to talk about in the Big Ten. Is it going to be Ohio State and Michigan or Wisconsin and Nebraska? I went with Wisconsin and Nebraska partially because, first of all, I don't want to get looked at as a homer for talking about Ohio State games. I do think Michigan will win that game. Ohio State not nearly as good a team as is Michigan this year in basketball. But I would say Wisconsin and Nebraska, it should have a closer spread. And I also think it's interesting because Nebraska is a team that, they seem to be on the bubble for the NCAA tournament every year. I'm trying to think of the last time that they weren't on the bubble for the NCAA tournament. And, it was a couple of years ago they went 12-19. Last year they were on the bubble. And this is a team that, with Tim Miles, last year they looked like they were going to be in the NCAA tournament, and then they end up not making it. And then this year, they start out really, really strong. It looks like they should easily make the NCAA tournament. Now they've lost 5 of their last 7 games. I think the most surprising part of that is they've lost their last couple of those games at home. And I remember, we've talked about how well they've done at home at Pinnacle Bank Arena. It surprised me quite a bit that Ohio State went to Nebraska and beat them. I think it's certainly notable that their second leading scorer, Copeland, is out for the year with an injury. I think that's a pretty big loss for Nebraska, because Nebraska, if they have a weakness, it's they don't have as many scoring options as some of the other teams in this league. I think Miles is a good coach. I think that they're solid defensively, although their big Achilles heel has been defensive rebounding. So teams that get a lot of second chance opportunities can take advantage of them. In this game, what do we make of this game? I think, first of all, I wanted to say that I think Ethan Happ is tremendous. I've watched him enough. I've coached some basketball in the past. I love basketball, everything about it. Ethan Happ, just a tremendous player. His low post moves, his ability to pass the ball out of the post, has all kinds of low post moves. He's a tremendous player, and he also is that throwback type player that you just don't see very often anymore. He's not a 6'10" guy that wants to shoot 3-pointers. He's a 6'10" guy that's going to stay in the low post and just dominate down there. Love watching him play. I don't know that Nebraska has anybody that can stop them. Not many people do. But this is a really key game for Nebraska. Wisconsin, what's made them so much different this year compared to last year when they went 15-18? Look, last year they were in defensive efficiency 66th in the country. This year they're 9th. So they're back to playing really solid defense. The other thing that's notable, they were 244th in three-point percentage at 33.5%. This year they're 9th in the country at 40%. So Wisconsin is shooting threes really well and playing much better defense. I'm really interested to see what this line comes out at. I think that, Wisconsin's been playing so well lately. Nebraska can't be favored by much here, especially with the injury. Is this one about pick'em? I would say, maybe -1 Nebraska, or maybe, like money line -115 type situation. I think this will be very close. I would lean toward the under if I had to take something in this game. Nebraska doesn't play that fast, and we all know Wisconsin's very good at controlling tempo.
I don't know, man. I'm looking at Ethan Happ. I think I would adopt the hack-a-Happ approach. 48.8% at the free throw line, 37.1% in conference play. If Wisconsin's going to keep shooting the ball well from three, maybe you just hack Happ around. Use your bench depth and take away some of those possessions there for the Badgers. But like you said, and this is something that's important to talk about too. You mentioned the Copeland injury. Has Nebraska changed its tempo at all with him out of the equation?
Well, he just got hurt, so I think he got hurt during the Ohio State game the other day. So, it's hard to say. I would say that they'll probably play fairly similarly. It just might be hard for them to be as efficient on offense. And if you look at Nebraska also, Copeland was a pretty good rebounder, and they were already really struggling on the defensive glass. So I think that's the single biggest thing to watch for now is, do they just get dominated on the glass every game? And if they do, it can be really hard to win. And I've talked about here this year that I really think that people need to look at rebounding, especially defensive rebounding percentages, more than they do as far as betting, because giving that team second opportunities is really dangerous.
All right, so we head out to Thursday night here, and we'll go down to the SoCon, East Tennessee State and Samford, which, by the way, according to Bart Torvik, listed as the best game of the night for Thursday night. What are you looking for in this matchup here, Kyle?
Well, I say this every so often, but where else are you going to hear about Lipscomb and Liberty and East Tennessee State and Samford? I imagine they won't be talked about anywhere else. I think this is a really, really good game. I agree with Bart Torvik as far as the best game of the night. If I were going to watch one game, this would be it. Do you remember the first game between these two, East Tennessee State and Samford? Samford was ahead a good amount of that game. They almost won right at the end. There were a couple questionable calls. Scott Padgett got into it with, I believe it was Carl Hess, the referee, and there's a pretty epic soundbite about that one if you go back and look at Scott Padgett talking about Carl Hess just coming up on him like he wanted to fight or something. It was a game that Samford lost in heartbreaking fashion, and then everything fell apart for Samford right after that game. They lost to Western Carolina, a team that they never should have lost to. Then they lost to Chattanooga, a team that they definitely shouldn't have lost to either. Now, Samford pulls it together. They win at Furman on Saturday. Furman's certainly a quality team. We know that Furman was in the top 25 earlier this year. They were never one of the top 25, but they're a quality team here in the SoCon. Samford beats them, then has a home game against East Tennessee State. I think this is a massive game for the Samford team. I think they'll put everything they've got into this game. East Tennessee State's a very high-quality team. They've only lost to UNC Greensboro in the conference. They haven't played Wofford yet in the conference, so that'll be a big game as well. But I think that Samford wants this one really bad. Not to say that East Tennessee State doesn't want it, but the way they lost that first game, very, very tough to take. East Tennessee State is better on defense. They're very good on the glass. That's the biggest advantage they have over Samford is they're going to get a lot of second-chance opportunities. And like I said, I really don't like betting a team that is going to lose on the boards that badly. So that's my caveat here with Samford. I would want to get some points here at home, thinking that it'll be a close game, but I think this one will probably be about pick-em.
Not even just that win over Furman on the road for Samford, but that came, about less than 48 hours after losing to Wofford by a point in overtime on the road. So big rallying point there on Saturday for Samford. Good week of practice here. You kind of wonder, though, with that Saturday spot, yeah, it's a revenge game against Western Carolina, but it's sandwiched between this ETSU game and then UNC Greensboro. That looks like a spot where I would not want to lay a big number with Samford here coming up on Saturday.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like you said, it's a revenge game, so they're going to want to win that game. But are they going to want to win that game by a margin? I think that's the question. I'd be surprised if they lose to Western Carolina, but you're probably going to be laying 15 points. And it also depends on how as far as this game goes, as to whether they should be as focused. I mean, if they win this game against East Tennessee State, I think it makes it a worse spot for that Western Carolina game. If they lose to East Tennessee State, maybe they take their frustration out on Western Carolina, but definitely something to keep an eye on.
Well, maybe that's a spot that shows up in your situational article over at BangTheBook.com, which you can check out here today. All right, one more game. We go down to Conference USA. We had a lot of success with Conference USA last week. We'll see if we can do it again here this week for UAB and Middle Tennessee State.
Yeah, we've talked about Middle Tennessee State several times here on the show. This is a team that has played a really tough schedule. I mean, they have played the 35th toughest schedule in the country. They were third non-conference schedule as far as how tough it was. They got a couple wins. Then they go on the road and lose to Rice, North Texas. They play UAB here. We talked about UAB's defense not being as good as they look last week, and I still think that's the case. MTSU has been terrible ATS so far this year. I have two leans in this game. I lean toward MTSU plus the points. I would hope to get 6.5 or 7 points with MTSU in this one. The other thing I kind of like in this game is the over. The one thing that kind of stands out about this game as well is, for some reason, the Conference USA schedulers, which they've confused me quite a few times this year. These two teams play each other twice in a row, so that makes very little sense to me. I don't like it when that happens. But here they are playing Wednesday and then again on Saturday. So what happens in Wednesday's game will determine what the line is and what kind of motivational spots there are in the next game quite a bit. But I think in this Wednesday game, you get a UAB team that plays fairly slowly but is very efficient on offense. They're second in offensive efficiency in Conference USA. Middle Tennessee has not been very efficient on offense. They've done a little bit better here of late, and their defense is not good. I think that Middle Tennessee is playing a little bit quicker. averaging almost 72 possessions in their games in Conference USA. So some very fast-paced games there against UTSA, UTEP, FIU. Everybody plays fast against them. But pushing the pace a little bit, I think we see a pretty low total here, so certainly would lean to over, especially if you get one in the low 130s.
Playing back-to-back games against each other, a home and home. And I know that there's been a really strong NBA angle about home and homes for the team that loses the first one. We'll see what happens here with UAB and Middle Tennessee State. Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper over at huntersportspicks.com. What's going on over there right now, man?
Still running the special for the rest of the year for college basketball, $425. Kyle at huntersportspicks.com or at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. If you want something shorter term, you can message me and I'll try to work out something with you as well. I'm not going to just say no, it has to be the rest of the season. I always try to work with people. Have different options available there at huntersportspicks.com, available to buy monthly, weekly, things like that. So check out everything there and sign up for the Free Picks newsletter if you haven't already as well. I did also want to mention, I appreciate everybody checking out the article daily here at BangTheBook.com, college basketball article. I know that's gotten quite a bit of run here of late, and, I've done really well. I'm going to try to keep doing the best I can, keep putting in the work, and we'll see how it goes. And also, if you haven't already been checking out the videos, check out the videos at YouTube. Search Bang the Book. We'll have a couple of those coming up from me. I know Adam does a lot of videos there. Brian Blessing does some videos for Bang the Book. So I think that more people need to check out those videos at YouTube. There's a lot of good stuff there.
Yeah, we'll have Kyle's situational betting article today. And then we'll have his videos Wednesday and Friday, and another edition of Handicapping the Hardwood later on in the week when we'll also talk about some Super Bowl prop bets. So Kyle Hunter, huntersportspicks.com and bangthebook.com. Appreciate the time as always, man. Thank you so much. Talk to you again later in the week.
All right. Thanks, man.